My name is Eleanor Harris, though everyone around town just calls me Granny Ellie. I'm 78 years old now, sitting in a quiet little house on the edge of Charleston, South Carolina. The sun is slipping low, painting the marshes in gold, and the cicadas are humming that old familiar song of summer. At my age, you think you've lived through all kinds of storms. Wars, deaths, sickness, the passage of time. But some storms don't come from the world outside. They come from your own blood, from the people who share your name, your history, your childhood memories. And those storms leave a wound so deep that even when you smile, even when you laugh, you can still feel the scar aching inside. This story I'm about to tell you isn't easy for me. It's about my brother, Daniel, my only brother, the boy I once adored, the man I once trusted, the person I never thought would turn against me. But life has a way of teaching you the hardest lessons through the people you least expect. I was born in 1947, the oldest of 3 children. And came Daniel in 1950, and our baby sister Ruth in 1955. Our daddy was the fisherman, gone before sunrise most mornings, and Mama kept house, raising us with firm hands and tender hearts. We lived in a small wooden home by the river, paint peeling, screens rattling in the summer wind, but it was ours. Daniel and I grew up like 2 branches of the same tree. From the start, he followed me everywhere. If I climbed the oak tree in the yard, he was right behind me. If I read books in the school library, he sat beside me pretending to understand the words. If I fought off bullies, he stood by me with fists clenched, even when he was too little to do much damage. Mama used to laugh and say, "Daniel, you'll never let your sister out of your sight, will you?" And he grinned with those crooked front teeth and answered, "No, ma'am, she's mine to look after." And I believed him. We had a bond that felt unbreakable. Summers were spent running barefoot down dirt roads, catching fireflies in jars, fishing off the dock with Daddy. Winters meant huddling by the wood stove, telling stories and whispering secrets under wool blankets. Daniel and I had dreams together, too. He wanted to start his own business someday, and I dreamed of becoming a teacher. But even in those innocent days, I noticed something in Daniel. He had a hunger in him, a restless fire. Where I was content with simple joys, Daniel always wanted more money, more attention, more freedom. Your daddy gave us each a dime, he wanted a quarter. If I got praise for grave, Daniel wanted to outshine me somehow. That burst it off as normal sibling rivalry, but in truth, it was a seed. A seed that would grow into something darker. By the time we were teenagers, our paths began to split. I poured myself into school, determined to earn a scholarship. Daniel, though smart, was drawn to shortcuts. He'd skip classes, hustle games of pool, make a little money selling things he found. Mama scolded him. Daddy whipped him more than once, but Daniel just laughed it off. "I'll make you big one day, you see." And in a way, he did. After high school, I went to college in Columbia. Daniel stayed behind, drifting from one job to another. Mechanic, delivery driver, bartender. He had charm, I'll give him that. People liked him and trusted him, and he used that trust to get what he wanted. Sometimes it was harmless. Other times it wasn't.
I remember coming home one Christmas, snow falling light on the river banks. Mama's hair had turned silver by then, and Daddy's back was bent from years of fishing. Ruth was still in school, sweet and innocent, and Daniel was still Daniel. He showed up with a new car, shiny and loud, claiming he bought it fair and square. I didn't ask questions, but I saw the way Daddy's eyes narrowed, the way Mama wrung her hands. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Daniel sat with me by the tree. He leaned close and whispered, "Ellie, you and me, we're different. You go by the rules, I bend them, but we're both going to get what we want in the end." I laughed it off, but a chill settled in my bones. Years went by. I married a good man named Charles in 1971. We moved back to Charleston, bought a little house, and built a life. I became a teacher like I'd always dreamed, standing in front of classrooms full of children, hoping to give them more than I ever had. Charles was steady, dependable, a man of few words but strong arms. He gave me 2 children, Samuel and Anna, and for a time I felt like life was everything I had hoped for. Daniel, on the other hand, was always chasing. He started a small construction business, and for a while it seemed like he was turning things around. He made money, dressed sharp, threw parties that people in town talked about for weeks. But underneath it, there was always something slippery. Deals that didn't add up, or workers who complained they weren't paid. Banks calling Mama's house when he couldn't be reached. Still, he was my brother. And when Mama and Patty passed, Daddy first, then Mama a few years later, I leaned on him more than I thought I would. Ruth had moved out west by then, and Daniel and I sorted through the old house, packed up the memories, stood by the graves together. He held my hand. For a moment, I thought maybe the boy I once adored was still in there somewhere. But grief has the way of revealing people's true colors. When Mama passed, she left the house and a small piece of land tucked street. It wasn't worth much, but it was home. Ruth didn't want her share. She lived too far away and told us to divide it between us. That left me and Daniel. I wanted to keep the house, to hold on to the place where we'd grown up, where Mama's hand had baked biscuits and Dad's laughter had filled the rooms. But Daniel, he wanted money. He wanted to sell it, pay the cash, and move on. We argued. Oh, how we argued. I begged him, "Please, Daniel, let me keep the house. You can have my savings in exchange. Just don't sell it." But he shook his head, eyes cold. "It's not about the house, Ellie. It's about what I deserve, and I deserve my share." I ended up giving him every cent of my savings just to keep that house standing. It nearly broke me, but I thought it was worth it. I thought that would be the end of it.
I remember the night Daniel took that next step, like it was a cut that never stopped bleeding. It was late autumn. The sky was sharp with cold, and the river that once looked so kind in summer had gone hard and gray. Charles was away on a repair job up the coast, and the children were grown and out of the house for the night. I had fallen asleep on the sofa with the TV murmuring quietly when I heard the key in the lock. It was Daniel. He had that lopsided grin that used to mean mischief, but that night it looked worn, as if life had sharpened his edges. He came in like a man who belonged, dropping his coat on the peg and calling out, "Ellie, you awake?" I sat up, brushing sleep from my eyes, and smiled because, for a breath, I was the little sister again. I made him tea the way Mama used to, and we sat by the fire. He told stories, big ones, about projects he was planning, about a contract he'd almost won, about an investor who wanted to help. He talked of how he could finally put down roots and give Mama's house the care it deserved. I listened because he had a way of making the future sound like a kind invitation. That was his trick. He made me believe. Ellie, he said slowly, leaning over the coffee table, I need you to help me. I can't do this without someone who has a clean record and a steady name. Could you be a co-signer for a loan from me, just to help me get the equipment? I'll pay you back. I promise. His voice was soft. Practiced? I felt the old tug of protectiveness. He'd always needed someone to look after him. Maybe he was finally being honest. I hesitated. I knew better than to sign anything without reading it, but he caught my hand, eyes earnest, and I thought of Mama's house decaying while Daniel's promises shone like gold, so I signed. I put my name down on the dotted line for a loan with a local bank, a small amount it seemed at first. Daniel said he'd use the money to buy heavy equipment and would pay it back from jobs. I felt useful. I felt like a sister helping her brother rise. Within months, the reality showed itself. The checks weren't paid. The invoices didn't match the machines he'd bought. There were names I didn't recognize, and a pile of bills gathering on the kitchen table like dead leaves. Daniel kept promising he'd make it right. Just another job, just another week, and I believed him. A part of me always did. Brothers are like that. No matter the harm, you want them to grow into the man you thought they could be. What none of us saw coming was what Daniel did when the bank started to ask questions. He was clever. He took the loan documents, the bills, and a handful of old property records we'd kept for Mama. He forged a signature on a deed, a little flourish that would put a northern lot in his name. Then he called a contractor in another town and arranged a fake set of receipts. He moved things around like someone setting up a stage. All the while, he would steal my brother in public, laughing at family gatherings, showing up at Fee and Rose with a hand on my shoulder, while behind closed doors, he was dismantling everything I had tried to keep. The first knock from the bank came one gray morning while I was sorting papers for school. The man at the counter had a way of folding his hands that made me think of the church deacon. He explained, polite, that the loan had gone unpaid and the bank needed to place a lien. I felt a cold so deep I could not breathe. But it's my name, I said fondly. I'm the co-signer. He said, he promised. He sympathized. He said the polite things, and then left me with a stack of notices stamped with red letters. The next weeks were a blur of calls, of meetings, of nights waiting on hold, while my voice grew hoarse explaining the story I barely understood. Daniel was never too far when it was convenient, but at the first sign of trouble, he started to slip away. A message would come saying he was traveling for work, or a friend had come through town, or he needed to stay with an aunt. He was always one step ahead of accountability and one step behind taking responsibility. When the first lien went on the house, I felt like someone had taken Mama's hands and twisted them. The papers said we were in default. I tried to go to Daniel, but his phone would go straight to voicemail. My son, Samuel, came around and took charge in the way that a son might, angry and protective. He marched down the bank steps and demanded answers. The bank clerk showed him the documents, the signatures. We all stared at the looping ink that looked familiar and foreign at the same time. He must have forged it, he said through clenched teeth, but even his certainty could not undo the clear betrayal. Gossip, like water,
found every crack in the town. Teachers' whispers at the school were worse than the bank letters sometimes. People love to come to their own conclusions. Was the teacher, who had always shown up at PTA meetings, suddenly tied to fraud? Rumors do not need evidence to grow. They only need a breath. I tried to meet the gay with dignity, but each step felt like walking through wet soil. The second blow came worse than the first. I woke one morning to the sound of sirens, cars, and lights boomed outside my home. Men in uniforms were at my door. A neighbor had called when she saw strangers moving boxes into the basement at late night. She thought it odd, and rightly so. My heart beat against my ribs like a trapped bird. The police came in and went through the rooms with careful hands, asking me questions I could not answer. They took photographs of the basement, where, to my horror, they found crates of goods that had been aborted, stolen from a nearby warehouse. I stared at the boxes as if they had been planted by someone else, because they had been. When the officers asked me if I knew anything, I felt every eye in the room like a blade. I said, "No, I don't know anything." They looked at my hands as if expecting to see guilt not there. Later at the station, a detective asked pointed questions. "Did you know anything about any of this being stored in your home?" My answers were hoarse. My voice was down. The word they used that was common in police file was accessory. That word felt like a noose, tightening. Even when you know you're innocent, the seeds of doubt are sown in the minds of others. Parents pulled their children from my classes. Colleagues avoided me in the teacher's lounge. I watched the faces of families that I taught for decades slip away as if I had a contagious disease. Anna, my daughter, tried to stand by me, but her husband's mother warned her about reputational risk. She told her to put distance between herself and scandal. Samuel wrote an angry letter to Daniel, demanding his brother answer for what he had done. He did not. That silence stuck more than any lie. The school board called a meeting. The superintendent sat behind an oak table and asked me to explain. I stood on my 2 feet with the full weight of 40 years of teaching on my shoulders and tried to speak with the voice that had steadied so many children. I told them the truth, that I'd co-signed for Daniel, that I'd been duped, that the boxes were not mine. Some of them listened with pity. Others took the side of caution. The board suspended me pending an investigation. The legal counsel said it was standard procedure. I left the room feeling hollowed out, as if someone had squeezed the joy out of my chest and left only work to do to survive. Daniel, meanwhile, was a ghost. He moved from town to town, living a trail of unpaid bills and small crimes. Sometimes I would get a postcard stamped from a different fade with a single line, "Don't worry, I'll fix it." Each card felt like salt on the wound. The worst part were the nights when I'd lay awake, imagining him sitting somewhere else eating dinner because of the choices he had made while my children packed up my old home to make room for lawyers and appraisers. There were moments I wanted to scream at the world, at Daniel, at myself. How had I been so blind? How could I have been so foolish as to trust him with the paper that would ruin us? But the place anger took me with grief. Grief settled in like winter fog. When people stopped inviting me to gatherings, I felt like a ghost at my own table. When parents whispered and children looked away, the room would shrink around me, and I would feel the member of Mama's hand folding biscuit as if they could shield me. I started to do what little I could. I opened mail that was thick with notices and reached out to legal aid clinics that served teachers. I sat with Samuel and Anna, and we went to papers line by line like detectives of our own family. We found signatures that were altered, numbers that...
I don't think I'll ever forget the first time I stood in the courtroom. The air in there was heavy, like everyone's whispers and confessions over the years had seeped into the wood panels and stayed. I remember clutching my purse so tightly my knuckles were white. Samuel sat beside me, his jaw tight, his hands folded the way his daddy used to when he was holding back his anger. Canna was behind us, her eyes soft but her shoulders squared, like she was ready to carry me if I stumbled. It was a hearing about the loan that had started this whole nightmare. The bank's lawyers spoke in polished words, their suits crisp, their voices sharp. They laid out documents, signatures, receipts. Each page felt like a hammer striking my chest. And then, when they asked me to confirm that the signature was mine, I had to nod, because it was. That first one, the co-signature, I had put my hand to that paper out of love, out of loyalty, out of blindness. But the others, the others weren't mine. They were Daniel's handwork, forged, twisted, planted like weeds in the dirt I'd once tried to keep pure. My lawyer, a kind man named Mr. Harris, who had a gentle drawl, laid out the comparisons. He showed how the strokes changed, how the dates didn't align. He pulled apart Daniel's sloppy lies thread by thread. For the first time in months, I felt like the truth might have a fighting chance. Still, the shame didn't lift. Every time someone glanced at me in that courtroom, I felt like they saw not a victim, but a woman who should have known better. A teacher, a mother, a grandmother. Shouldn't I have seen through him sooner? That's the cruelest part of betrayal. It doesn't just break your trust in the other person. It makes you question yourself, your worth, your wisdom. After that first hearing, the process dragged on. Court dates, depositions, affidavits, weeks blurred into months. My savings drained into legal fees. The house grew quieter, emptier, as I sold pieces of furniture to cover costs. The old piano, where Samuel once practiced scales, went to a neighbor. Mama's rocker, with its smooth, worn arms, was bought by a collector. Each item that left felt like another little death. And still, Daniel was nowhere. Rumors reached us he'd been seen in Nashville, then in Birmingham, then in some small town in Kentucky. Each time it was like hearing news of a ghost. He was always just far enough away to escape, close enough to haunt me. But one morning, when the sun hadn't yet risen and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of weak coffee, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said to pick it up. On the other end, a voice, raspy, tired, familiar. Ellie. It was him. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. Finally, I managed. Daniel. Yeah, it's me. Listen, I need help. Those words, I'd heard them my whole life. I closed my eyes and let silence stretch. He coughed, like he'd been smoking or drinking too much. I messed up, Ellie, more than before. They're looking for me. I don't know where else to turn. I wanted to twame. I wanted to tell him about the nights I cried, the classroom I nearly lost, the looks that burned me at church, the things he'd stolen from me that had nothing to do with money. But what came out instead was quiet, almost like a prayer. Why, Daniel? Why did you do this to me? There was a pause. Then, in a voice so small it almost broke me, he said, because you were the only one who ever believed in me, and I hated you for it. Those words, strange, twisted, raw, cut deeper than all the forged papers and stolen goods. He had hated me for loving him, for holding him to a standard he couldn't reach.
Betrayal isn't always about greed. Sometimes it's about envy, about the dark corners of the heart that can't bear to see someone else standing strong. I told him then, as steady as I could, Daniel, I can't help you anymore. You've taken everything you could from me. I'll pray for you, but I won't protect you. And then, before my heart could waver, I hung up. 2 weeks later, the police found him in a motel in Tennessee. Drunk, broke, caught with forged checks and false IDs. He was arrested, extradited, and brought back to face charges. When I saw the news article with his mugshot, I leapt. Not from victory, not from relief, but from grave. That was my brother, Mama's son, reduced to a headline and a number. The court process after his arrest was long and bitter. I will cause testify. Sitting on that witness stand, I felt every eye on me, heavy and expectant. Daniel sat across the room, thinner, older, his face lined with choices that had carved him hollow. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I spoke the truth, the whole truth, about the loans, the forgeries, the boxes in my basement I had knew not about, the nights of doubt, and whispered. My voice shook, but it held. For once I wasn't speaking for him, I was speaking for me. The jury found him guilty of fraud, forgery, and theft. He was sentenced to several years in prison. When the gavel struck, it echoed in my bones. Justice had been served, but it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like standing in the ruins of the house after a fire, knowing the flames were out, but the walls would never be the same. And the months that followed, slowly, life began to rebuild. The school board reinstated me fully, and though not everyone welcomed me back with open arms, enough parents did that I could keep teaching. Samuel and Alice stood by me, and the bonds of them grew tighter, tested in the fire and found strong. We managed to settle with the bank, thanks to evidence Mr. Harris presented. I had to pay back part of the debt, but not the crushing sum Daniel had left behind. The house remained mine, scarred but standing. The community, too, began to shift. Whispers faded, replaced by nods of recognition. People began to see me not as a woman shamed, but as a woman who endured. Children returned to my classroom, and sometimes when I taught them about honesty or about responsibility, I would see their eyes shine as if they understood that I wasn't just teaching from books. I was teaching from life. And Daniel, he wrote from prison. The letters came sporadically, scrawled and uneven. At first they were full of excuses, blaming just about everyone by themselves. Then slowly they changed. He admitted things, lies he told, money he has taken, people he hurt. He never outright apologized, not in the way I longed for, but there are lines, here and there, that showed cracks in his pride. Ellie, one letter said, sometimes I dream about Mama's house, about us running by the river. I don't know how I got a little lost. I never wrote back. Not because I hated him anymore, but because I had learned the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness is something you give for yourself, to free your own heart from bitterness. Reconciliation requires trust, and trust, once shattered that completely, cannot always be rebuilt. I chose to forgive him in silence, to release the anger, to stop carrying his sins like stones in my pockets, but I did not invite him back into my life. That was the lesson, the hard one. It took me decades to learn. Love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be destroyed. Now when I sit on the porch of Mama's house, the same porch where Daniel and I once shared secrets as children, I feel both sorrow and peace. The oak tree out front still stands tall. Its branches spread wide like arms that don't sit at all. The scars on my heart are real, the salt street I came. My grandchildren come running up the steps, their laughter spilling into the evening air. They ask me for stories, and sometimes they tell them funny ones about their great-grandmother, or gentle ones about their mama and uncle when they were young. But every now and then, when the time feels right, I tell them peace of the story. I tell them that betrayal can come from those closest to us. That trust is a precious gift. That forgiveness is powerful, but boundaries are necessary. And most of all, I tell them this. You can survive a fire. You can walk through the ruin and still find yourself standing on the other side. I have lost my brother to his choices. I lost years with peace to his schemes. But I did not lose myself. I am still here. I am still strong, and I will